Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving back into these amazing slave narratives,
Yeah,
these firsthand accounts from people who lived through the brutal reality of slavery in America.
yeah,
We've said it before,
absolutely.
and we'll say it again.
Mm,
They're just so powerful, more impactful than any fictional story could ever be.
I agree.
And today we're really going deep on one that stands out even among these incredible stories.
Oh, yeah.
Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave, a book that was hugely important during the abolitionist movement.
That's right.
It really helped fuel that movement.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that makes Northup's story so compelling is that
Yeah.
it's not just a list of all the terrible things he went through. He really paints this incredibly vivid picture of his life before he was kidnapped.
Yeah.
A skilled laborer, a musician, a family man,
Hmm.
living a pretty good life, actually, as a free man in New York.
Right.
And this contrast just really drives home the magnitude of what he lost.
Yeah. It's like setting the stage for a tragedy, right? We get this glimpse of his happy, normal life.
Right.
And it makes his fall into slavery all the more devastating.
Yeah,
And the way he was tricked into captivity is just wild.
it is.
He talks about these two strangers who lure him in with the promise of a short, well-paid music gig.
Right.
I mean, haven't we all been tempted by those too good to be true offers at some point?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's so relatable in a way.
It is. And I think it's really interesting how Northup captures just how insidious the slave trade was.
Yeah.
It wasn't always about brute force and kidnapping.
Right.
They would often use these really manipulative tactics playing on people's ambitions and dreams.
Right.
Like in Northup's case, they used ventriloquism to gain his trust.
Really?
Yeah. But what's really chilling is how he describes this growing unease as they take his free papers
Oh, yeah.
and move him further and further south.
It's like you can practically feel the walls closing in as you read those passages.
Absolutely. And then that sudden illness in Washington, D.C.,
Oh, yeah.
waking up in chains, disoriented,
Oh,
it's just this brutal transition from freedom to captivity.
totally. And the symbolism of where he ends up next is just mind-blowing.
Yeah,
The slave pen was right there, in plain sight of the Capitol building.
I know.
The symbol of freedom and democracy, looking down on this place of just unimaginable cruelty.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Talk about irony.
Yeah,
It's in this slave pen that Northup really brings the human cost of slavery to life.
he does.
He describes Eliza, this distraught mother who's being separated from her children.
Yeah, I remember that.
She's clinging to them
It's
desperately.
heartbreaking.
He quotes her saying, "They nestled closely to her as if there only was there any safety or protection."
Oh, wow.
And later she cries out, "It would break her heart, God knew," she said, "if they were taken from her. And yet she knew they meant to sell them, and maybe they would be separated and could never see each other anymore."
That's just awful.
Just heartbreak.
Eliza's story is a reminder that slavery wasn't just about economics.
No,
It was about destroying families, destroying lives, treating human beings as property.
that's right. And then there's Arthur, a free man like Northup who was also kidnapped,
Yeah.
brutally beaten.
Yeah.
Northup describes him as this defiant figure refusing to be broken by his captors.
Right. That really stood out to me, too.
It's this small glimmer of hope in this incredibly dark place.
It is. Arthur embodies that resilience of the human spirit, that refusal to just give up, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty.
Absolutely. And that spirit is tested even further during the voyage south on this ship, the Brig Orleans.
Right.
Cramped conditions, disease, death. Northup even talks about a foiled escape attempt.
It's amazing. It really shows how strong the desire for freedom is, that even in those terrible circumstances, they were willing to risk everything.
Totally. And then we get this unexpected turn in the story.
Yeah.
They arrive in Louisiana, and Northup is sold to William Ford,
Right.
a man he describes as a model master. Ford was a religious man,
Oh, okay.
and he actually allowed his slaves to have Bibles, which was pretty unusual.
Oh, wow. So that raises a really interesting question. Does that make Ford a good slave owner?
It's complex, isn't it?
It is. It's something that Northup grapples with in his narrative. I mean, Ford's relative kindness doesn't change the fact that he was still part of a deeply unjust system.
That's right.
It shows that there was a range of experiences within slavery.
Yeah.
But it also reminds us that even the best slave owners were still complicit in a system built on dehumanization.
That's a good point. And even under Ford, Northup's fate was uncertain.
Yeah.
He was eventually sold to John Tybeats, and things took a very dark turn.
Oh, yeah. Tybeats is like the stereotypical cruel overseer,
He is.
driven by this need to have power and control,
Hmm.
and Northup becomes the target of his rage.
Yeah. Northup describes Tybeats constantly finding fault with him, driving him relentlessly.
It's terrible.
He even details this near-hanging incident
Oh, gosh.
where Tybeats, in a fit of fury, tries to lynch him. You can feel Northup's desperation in those moments, his struggle to survive.
It's terrifying.
It really is. It's a visceral reminder of the constant threat of violence that hung over enslaved people.
Absolutely. Their lives were in the hands of their masters, and even the smallest perceived offense could have deadly consequences.
And it's in this moment of complete despair that we meet another character,
Okay.
Chapin.
Yeah.
He's the overseer on a neighboring plantation.
Okay.
He sees what's happening and steps in, preventing the hanging.
That's amazing.
His words to Tybeats are so powerful. "You're a rascal. You're on no good errand."
Wow. He really stood up to him.
It's this small act of defiance against Tybeats' cruelty.
Yeah, Chippen's an interesting character. He represents some of the complexities of the system,
In what way?
Well, he's a white man who benefits from slavery,
Right.
but he also sees how unjust Tybeats' actions are.
That's true.
It highlights these moral dilemmas that some people faced, even within a society that largely supported slavery.
That's a really good point. And under Chapin's protection, Northup is hired out to Peter Tanner,
Yeah.
this guy who used scripture to justify slavery.
It's a chilling example of how people in power twisted religion to serve their own interests.
It really is. It shows just how pervasive white supremacy was, how it infected even religious beliefs.
Right. It's like they had to twist their own beliefs to make it okay.
Yeah, it's really disturbing.
Mm.
And then comes the longest and maybe the most brutal chapter of Northup's journey. 10 years under Edwin Epps.
Oh, yeah.
Epps is just a terrifying figure.
He is.
Northup describes him as a nigger breaker,
Oh, wow.
a
Yeah.
cruel, greedy, and often drunk man who saw slaves as nothing more than property.
Right. He ran his plantation like a prison camp with brutal work, barely any food, and punishments designed to crush their spirits.
You can really sense Epps's personality in Northup's writing.
Yeah.
This greedy, volatile figure using alcohol to fuel his cruelty.
Mm.
The detail about him forcing his slaves to dance for his amusement, even when they're exhausted.
Oh.
It's just chilling. It gives you a real sense of the psychological torment they went through.
That detail is so striking.
Yeah.
Because it really highlights how calculated the dehumanization was.
It was.
Slaves were denied basic freedoms, abused physically,
Right.
but then they were also forced to act happy.
To entertain their oppressors.
Exactly. It's a deeply demoralizing aspect of slavery that Northup captures so well.
And in the midst of all this suffering, we meet Patsy,
Oh, yeah.
this young woman who endured so much hardship.
She did.
She was a victim of Epps's lust, his wife's jealousy, and their constant abuse.
It's heartbreaking.
Her story is just devastating.
Yeah. Patsy represents the specific vulnerabilities of enslaved women,
Yes.
They were often subjected to sexual exploitation and violence by their masters.
Awful.
Her suffering is a testament to the just profound inhumanity of the system.
That's right. But even surrounded by all this cruelty, Northup never gives up hope of freedom.
It's incredible.
He figures out how to make ink and pens. And he even writes a letter detailing his situation, hoping to get word out.
That's amazing. Just the act of writing, of documenting his experience, it speaks to his strength and determination. This act of resistance, refusing to be silenced.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, his first attempt to send the letter fails.
Oh,
Trusting anyone was a huge risk,
of course.
and the fear of betrayal was constant.
Yeah. That constant fear is another thing that Northup conveys so well.
Yeah.
That paranoia,
Mhm.
the threat of betrayal, the knowledge that anyone could be an informant.
Right.
It created this climate of suspicion and distrust that made it so hard to form bonds or plan an escape.
I can't even imagine. But then this pivotal encounter happens.
Okay.
A carpenter named Samuel Bass arrives.
Right.
He's described as a very outspoken abolitionist,
Okay.
a man willing to challenge Epps directly about the morality of slavery.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a really remarkable moment in the narrative.
Yeah. Bass represents this small but growing group of white Americans who were starting to see how evil slavery was.
Right.
And working to abolish it.
Yeah.
His willingness to speak out, in the South no less, is a testament to his courage.
Absolutely. And so in this really daring act of faith, Northup confides in Bass,
He does.
shares his story, and trusts him with his hopes for freedom.
Wow.
It's a risky move,
Yeah,
but it's the one that ultimately sets in motion his long-awaited journey home.
it does. And that's a great place to pick up next time
Sounds good.
when we continue our deep dive
Okay.
into 12 Years a Slave.
Awesome.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye. So Northup's confided in Bass,
Right.
and now he's waiting.
Yeah.
But weeks turn into months
Oh, man.
with no word, and Northup talks about that feeling, of hope fading.
It's just agonizing.
It is. Just reading about it, it's agonizing. Can you imagine living through it?
Yeah, it's tough.
And then finally, the stranger arrives at Epps' plantation.
Okay.
It's like a scene out of a movie, honestly.
Yeah.
Northup's sent to play his violin for a group of white men, and he ends up talking with one of them about New York politics.
New York politics.
Yeah, of all things.
Wow.
And it turns out this man, Mr. Waddell, he's a friend of Bass.
Okay.
And he knows about the plan to rescue Northup.
What?
But get this, they're actually talking about Bass.
No way.
Not realizing that Northup is the very person they're trying to rescue.
Oh, my gosh.
I know, the tension must have been unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Northup's fate is hanging by a thread. Literally,
Yeah.
one wrong word, one slip-up, and the whole plan could fall apart.
Oh, man.
But Waddell, after hearing Northup's story,
Yeah.
he's convinced.
Okay.
He immediately contacts Bass,
Okay.
and then finally, after 12 long years,
Yeah.
the moment arrives,
Wow.
Bass shows up at Epps' plantation with the legal documents,
He did it.
ready to take Northup home.
It's amazing.
It's a moment of pure triumph,
It is.
not just for Northup,
Yeah.
but for justice, too.
Yeah.
Think about it. This free man
Yeah.
kidnapped, enslaved for over a decade. And then, through this series of incredibly fortunate events,
Right.
he's finally freed.
It's remarkable.
It really shows the power of hope and perseverance.
It does.
But even in this moment of liberation,
Yeah.
there's this profound sadness.
There is.
Like when he has to say goodbye to Patsy,
Oh, yeah.
it's heartbreaking.
It is.
Northup describes leaving her behind, still enslaved,
Right.
and it really highlights that his own freedom is bittersweet.
Yeah.
He's overjoyed to be going home, of course,
Of course.
but he can't forget those who are left behind, those who are still suffering.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder that the fight for freedom wasn't over, even with his own liberation.
That's a great point. And then we come to Northup's return to New York.
Yes.
The emotional reunion with his family.
Oh, I can't imagine.
After 12 years of being known only as Platt,
Yeah.
Solomon Northup is finally home.
It's a testament to the enduring strength of family, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Northup's story doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't.
He goes on to publish his memoir. He ends
Poor
12
guy.
years a slave in 1853.
Right.
And it becomes a major force in the abolitionist movement,
It did.
which makes his story even more important.
Absolutely.
It's not just a personal account of his suffering and resilience.
Right.
It's this historical document
Yeah.
that helped expose the horrors of slavery
It did.
and really energized the fight for its abolition.
I think Northup's narrative gave a voice to the voiceless.
Yeah.
It allowed people to see through his eyes the true brutality of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And that had a huge impact on public opinion, I think.
Yeah.
It helped turn the tide against this awful institution.
It's a powerful example of how one person's story can really spark social change.
It is.
So we've talked about Northup's journey,
Yeah.
the horrors he faced, his resilience,
Right.
his eventual freedom.
Mm.
What are some of the key takeaways you think listeners should walk away with?
Well, first and foremost, I think Northup's story is a testament to the power of the human spirit. Even facing such incredible cruelty, he never gave up hope.
He never did.
He never lost himself.
Yeah.
And his intelligence and resourcefulness really shine through, even in captivity.
Yeah, like when he figured out that cheaper way to transport lumber down the river for Ford.
Exactly. He wasn't this mindless, passive being that the slave system tried to make him.
Right.
And his story really shows how important it is to fight for justice.
Yes.
To speak out against oppression,
Yeah.
even when it's dangerous.
Like Samuel Bass did.
Exactly.
Risking his own safety to help Northup gain his freedom.
It's a great example of allyship,
It is.
Using your privilege to advocate for those who are being silenced.
Absolutely. And I think Northup's story reminds us that the fight for freedom and equality is still going on.
It is.
The legacy of slavery still affects us today.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have a responsibility to confront injustice wherever we see it.
I agree.
12 Years a Slave is a challenging book to read.
It is.
No doubt about it.
But it's an essential one.
It-
gives us this window into a dark part of American history.
Yep.
And forces us to really grapple with its legacy.
Yeah, if you haven't read it already, definitely add it to your list.
And if you want to explore more slave narratives,
Yeah.
There are so many other powerful voices out there.
There are.
You have the classics like Frederick Douglass's autobiography,
Right.
such an inspiring account of self-emancipation and intellectual awakening.
It is.
And for a contemporary perspective on the legacy of slavery,
Yeah.
you could check out The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson,
Okay.
which tells the story of the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the North,
Interesting.
or The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates,
Okay.
a novel that mixes historical fiction and magical realism to explore themes of memory, trauma, and resistance.
Those are great suggestions.
There are so many books out there
Yeah,
offering different perspectives on this really crucial part of our history.
absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for joining us on this but incredibly important deep dive into Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave.
It has been heavy, but important.
We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even inspiring.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with a question to think about.
Okay, hit me with it.
How can we make sure that voices like Northup's keep being heard? How can we use the lessons from the past
Right.
to help us fight for justice and equality today?
That is a really powerful question.
It is.
12 Years a Slave.
Yeah.
It's not just a historical document, is it?
No, it's not.
It's this testament to the enduring human spirit
Right.
and a call to action for us all.
Exactly. It reminds us that freedom isn't something we're just given.
Right.
It's something that we have to constantly fight for
We do.
and defend. And it challenges us to think about,
Yeah.
what are we doing in our own lives
Right.
to uphold those values, to fight for justice and equality ourselves?
Yeah, so it's not just about reading these narratives.
Yeah.
It's about actually doing something with those messages
Right,
and
yeah.
carrying those lessons forward.
Exactly.
So what can our listeners do?
Well,
What are some concrete steps to make a difference?
education's a big one, obviously.
Yeah.
Read these narratives, talk about them with others,
Yeah.
really discuss their significance, support organizations that are working to,
Right.
fight racism and promote social justice.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to speak up when you see injustice.
Right.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Remember Samuel Bass?
Oh, yeah, he's a great example.
He risked his own safety to help Northup.
He did.
And we can all be allies in our own ways.
Absolutely. And support the people who are telling these stories.
Yeah.
The artists and creators who are amplifying those voices that have been marginalized.
Because these stories need to be told.
Yes, they do.
They need to be heard.
They do.
They need to inspire us to action.
Absolutely. Northup's story shows us that the fight for freedom, it's never really over.
Right.
And that we each have a part to play
We do.
in making the world a more just and equitable place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this journey
Yeah, thank you.
into Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave. It's been a heavy
Yeah,
but incredibly important deep dive.
it has.
We hope you've learned something new
Yeah.
about this critical period of American history.
It's so important.
And that Northup's story will stay with you long after you finish listening.
I hope so.
Until next time,
Yeah.
keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for a better future.
See you then.